Yesterday, the Conservative Party's backbenchers, they convened to elect a new 1922 committee, which looks an awful lot like the original 1922 committee. They're the ethics and standards boards of members within the Conservative Party who drop the sword of Damocles over any ailing Prime Minister. They will oversee the new leadership election process, with the winner announced on September the 5th, exactly a month away from when the new Prime Minister will give his speech at conference. There are a lot of issues on the docket, be it cost of living, be it immigration, but one of the main things they've got to fix is the Tory party's pernicious sex pest problem. But to start off with a shill, we're going to talk about Carl's thesis of conservatism, because the Conservative Party clearly have forgotten what that means. They need to get back to a metaphysics of it, rather than
not
crying...
being sex pest.
Yeah, and also not crying like Steve Baker about everyone's being a socialist. Perhaps you should change it. So, to start off talking about conservative morals, perhaps we should talk about the big dog, Boris Johnson. He's a bit like Xing Zhongshan, you know, the guy that Count Dankula did a video on, the dog meat general, who said he has 3 don't knows. He doesn't know how many soldiers he has, he doesn't know how much money he has, and he doesn't know how many wives or concubines he has. Because Boris Johnson has had a serious series of affairs. He had a 4-year affair with a woman named Petronella Wyatt. He initially denied it, branding the claims an inverted pyramid of piffle. Fantastic line, but turns out it was a load of nonsense. He was forced to quit as the Shadow Arts Minister and Vice Party Chairman at the time when it became clear he'd been lying. This resulted also in a love child, which Petronella aborted. Not exactly very conservative value, and not something I can abide by. Petronella shed a bit of light on his thoughts about women, saying he had once grumbled, "I find it genuinely unreasonable that men should be confined to one woman," and she attributed this to Boris being inordinately proud of his Turkish ancestry, and said his views on matters such as monogamy are decidedly Eastern.
Yeah, I mean, this is a long-running standing thing for him. He's had open marriages and all the rest of it. Sorry to bust in, but if we can scroll back to the top, I just want to appreciate for a second the absolute state of the metro, like the headline there. You see, just
it's still there.
Yeah, I love it. You've got the racial pride flag with the German flag in the middle of it, weirdly, and then just news, but not as you know it. I mean, I feel like I'm looking at the Babylon Bee. Yeah, it's like, can you imagine if the news did this and just were rubbing it in your face that we were just
well, crap. Also, I assume they're marking their 50th anniversary, but it looks like they're like halfway to the Pride century.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, completely irrelevant.
That's all right. No worries. We should excoriate them every turn.
What the hell?
So, next link. Boris met his first wife, Allegra Mostyn Owen, when they were both 23 at university. They were married 6 months before divorcing. It's interesting that he said his views on monogamy are not very Eastern. Allegra did not remarry until 2010, when she tied the knot with a Pakistani man 22 years younger than her. She is now believed to be running workshops for young Muslims at a local London mosque. So that's quite the rebound from Boris saying that his Middle Eastern / Turkish heritage was the cause for his bouts of infidelity. I've obviously already mentioned Wheeler, who finalised her divorce with Boris in 2020 after his affair with his then head of comms, director at the Conservative Party HQ, the notorious Carrie Simons, now Carrie Johnson, who has declared she's going to step back from politics. I suppose that's quite a mask-off moment that she was actually the shadow prime minister and had Boris's balls in her purse for the entire time that he was in office. He was also sleeping with Times educational supplement journalist Anna Fazakerley at the same time as Petronella, so Boris had plenty of women on the go. I'm sure he used all his ministerial cars to flip between the houses. So Boris set that example, and then he resigned over the Chris Pincher affair. So I don't suppose we can expect much in the way of sexual propriety from, well, the man who presided over this. According to Lord MacDonald, who was working at the Foreign Office at the time as Boris Johnson, the Conservative MP for Tamworth was appointed Deputy Chief Whip at the time when Boris Johnson knew about complaints of his sexual misconduct. On July the 1st, Downing Street had spokesman trotted out and said Boris Johnson is not aware of specific allegations, but then the Working and Pension Secretary Therese Coffey appeared on the BBC's Sunday programme the next day and said, "To the best of my understanding, the Prime Minister has not been aware of specific allegations." This was then parroted again by Will Quince on Monday's Today programme, and Will Quince is one of the ministers who then subsequently quit when it turns out that Boris had known all along about it and has sent his ministers out as little minions to talk the party line, setting them up essentially for failure. Now, the interesting thing about the Chris Pincher scandal is one of the ministers who spoke to Pincher's accuser in the next link, John, he asked if the accuser was gay and said this actually clouds the situation somewhat by the fact that you've been groped by a man, even if it wasn't consensual. She's now been appointed as a position in Boris's caretaker cabinet, I suppose you could call it, the one that's shepherding into a new leadership. So it seems the Tory party have a culture of cover-up and that you can fail upwards. And unfortunately, this is pretty common knowledge among the party apparatchiks. As soon as you go to a Conservative Party conference, there's just the in-joke that you're going to get nonced on.
Really?
Yeah, so the last bar at Manchester is a big donut-shaped circle. It was a 40-minute queue for drinks. The amount of men who were clearly taking drugs or on drink, they're coming up to you. I was talking with a guy that was a spectator intern, just having a chat, knew him from some policy work, and a guy just walked up to us and was like, "Hey, what are you young boys doing?" Sort of just intervening in our conversation. It was notoriously common, and because it's a big circular bar.
Sorry, do you mean to people who are of age or underage?
They were all of age, because I don't think they let anyone in.
It's just friggin' weird.
Yeah, it's very strange. It's just very creepy. But because the bar was frequented by anyone and everyone, like flies around a turd, it sort of got the nickname the homosexual watering hole, just because it was that pernicious. No problem with gay men. It's just it's very much the realization of the trope with the Republicans in media like The Boys, where there's a Republican lawmaker and he's Mike Pence and he wants to electroshock people and he's secretly sleeping with male staffers. That's kind of the Conservative Party. So we move on to Neil Parish, who's one of the less egregious examples. He was the MP who claimed that when he'd looked at pornography in the chamber, he was just searching for tractors. So the first time he did that, he searched for a dominator, and a dominatrix website came up. And then he went back to the website in a separate session of the Commons and called it a moment of madness. They've done an interview recently with his wife. I believe he sat down with an interview with Lorraine the other day, but he's done one for the Daily Mail. And his wife apparently jokes that he's oversexed and chases him around the house with a pair of scissors and birdizos, the thing that you use to clip a cow's testicles off. And so he's now making basically a pseudo-celebrity career, having resigned as an MP for being a bit of a sex
becoming a porn
pest.
star, I know.
Yeah. It's like John Lorraine Bobbitt when his member was severed and then he starred in a porn film about his severed member. Wonderful. So, on to the more egregious examples. Imran Ahmed Khan, not to be confused with Pakistan's Prime Minister, the former Conservative MP has been sentenced to 18 months in jail for sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy after plying him with gin at a party in 2008. The 48-year-old was expelled from the Conservative Party and later resigned from the Commons, triggering a by-election in Wakefield, which the Conservatives recently lost. Then Crispin Blunt decided to jump on a rake and do a massive self-report in the next piece. Crispin Blunt MP called Khan's conviction a serious miscarriage of justice, which relied on lazy tropes about LGBT plus people that we might have put behind us decades ago. Nobody else was saying that every gay man is a paedophile, Crispin. So perhaps your hard drive needs check-in, mate. He then walked back this and said, "I do not condone any form of abuse and strongly believe in the independence and integrity of the justice system." Stock rhetoric. He also stepped down from the chairmanship of an all-party group advocating for LGBT plus rights around the world. So again, for some reason, your advocacy of a convicted paedophile, as you step back from actual advocacy, whether or not we agree with the goals of the committee, suddenly, again, you're conflating paedophiles with LGBT plus people that you claim to represent. It's just a bizarre...
Why do this? No one asking you to do this.
Yeah, you're the one making the news for your own neck here. So, when you spoke about Big Rob, we then move on to one of the worst Conservative politicians, Rob Roberts. Disgraced MP, 2019 intake, because of course he is, for Delyn in North Wales, was suspended for the party for 12 weeks for sexually harassing staff. Now, one of the people he was sexually harassing was Luke Robert Black, guy I know. He's the fella, actually, when you were reporting on the Conservative Party conference's LGBT Tories event, he was the doorman that let me into the event when I spoke to you about what had happened. And he was the guy essentially on the inside saying, look, there's an internal war, we don't want to fight with the LGB Alliance, but ITV gin this up, and there's a lot of radicals in the movement. I'm trying to moderate us to just get back to talking about equal of opportunity sexuality law and not wade into the identity politics stuff. He founded something called Blue Beyond, which is one of the Conservative Party's youth activist wings. Roberts hosted Zoom quizzes for Blue Beyond during lockdown and also secured a David Cameron endorsement for the group. Now, he did that because Luke's political hero was David Cameron. And then at the bottom of the next Guido Fawkes article, you can see that essentially Roberts had tried to do this to secure date with Luke and hold it as leverage over his head. So not only is he creeping on Tory youth groups, but he was also suspended from the party for 12 weeks for harassing staff. And then on his first day back, he decided to ask a question at Prime Minister's Questions, and there was just dead silence. There was barely any clapping. Except for one friend. One of his friends is Jamie Wallace, notorious trans MP, the first trans MP in Parliament. Now also a convicted criminal, but we'll brush over that because he's stunning and brave, I suppose. Bridgen's Conservative MP, Jamie Wallace, was found guilty of failing to stop and report a car accident and leaving his car in a dangerous position after crashing in the early hours of the 28th of November last year. He was cleared of driving without due care and attention, but he was fined £2,500 and disqualified for driving for 6 months. Wallace attempted a soft insanity plea. Essentially, he blamed it on PTSD. Wallace told the court he had been raped a month before the crash, obviously horrible, if true, and feared he would be raped, killed, or kidnapped following the crash.
By who?
Well, someone who has a trans fetish, apparently.
Didn't he crash into like a lamppost in the middle of nowhere?
He did, but he was wearing a black leather miniskirt and high heels at the time, and told the court he was feared he was going to be attacked.
I feel like the dog walkers who might have stumbled across him might have just been like, bit of a weirdo, all right.
Yeah, where's your dogging partner? Local resident Adrian Watson said he looked inside the car after it crashed and saw a white male wearing a white long sleeve top, which was tight to the body. You're welcome for that image. A black leather PVC miniskirt, tights, dark shoes, and high heels and a pearl necklace. So, dressed for the opera, apparently. The district judge, Tan Ikram, however, said he didn't find the defendant credible. Quote, when I watched him give evidence, probably because he was wearing the skirt in court, when I watched him give evidence, it seemed to me he was fitting his own behaviour around the behaviour of PTSD. The Amber Heard defence. And his actions on that night do not suggest he was overwhelmed and acting out of fear. I am sure he was not prevented through PTSD to give details or particulars and report the accident soon after. He made a decision that he didn't want to be there and made a decision to ring his dad. Though all of that period he could have rang 999 or 101, he didn't. I am sure he didn't, through a conscious choice, not being overwhelmed or acting irrationally. So essentially, you're just making it up that you were out of your mind. You're trying to use the insanity plea to cover for errors in your story, and you were making a quick getaway while dressed as a woman. Wallace's arrest. So, this was after he fled the scene and was found. Sergeant Gareth Handy told the court that he had forced entry into Wallace's family home address, which was described as a mansion and absolutely colossal. Nice work if you can get it. Out of concern for the MP. Because we often break down doors and arrest people out of concern. The police officer eventually found Wallace in one of the rooms and said he saw Jamie had makeup on his face. Police also found a blonde wig on a table in Wallace's flat that was part of the property. It kind of reads like they're busting Buffalo Bill. PC Lewis found Wallace asleep and said he happened to be wearing makeup. His eyelids were dark, his lips were red, his cheeks were bronze, and he had red nail polish on his toes. The black leather skirt and pearl necklace were found next to the bed and were seized by police. So there's actually video footage of the arrest that we can play here.
Don't tell me not to live, just sit and putter. Life's candy and the sun's a ball of butter. Don't bring around a cloud to rain on my parade. It's not working.
He obviously went quietly. Now, you might have heard about this offence from Wallace, from his self-diagnosed mental health conditions, from the coming out statement he boldly and bravely put on Twitter and on his parliamentary website. In the statement, he admits to having an extramarital affair, how conservative of you, explains how a man was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months in prison for an attempt to extort him out of £50,000 to keep his autogynephilia a secret. If you notice, he actually capitalises the B in blackmail there to be very progressive. And he admits to fleeing the scene of the crash.
I've read that you need to do that for the word black. It's the word blackmail. I don't care.
Yeah. Is it banned? Is it progressive? Don't know. In his statement, he says, quote, I am trans, or to be more accurate, I want to be. Because gender confusion is an aspiration now. I've been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and I've felt this way since I was a very young child, with which we wish him hope for his recovery, if genuine. I had no intention of ever sharing this with you. I always imagined I would leave politics well before I ever said this out loud. The truth is it always comes to the surface, and so you shouldn't really be hiding this from the electorate who elected you as a Conservative candidate, but may have dissident views that are outside of the Westminster bubble on whether or not men can become women. Obviously, there was prior reporting on the podcast from you, actually, on this, so if you'd like some more information of stuff at the time, including going through a Spiked article on his various grievances, you can go and watch Callum do that on the website. However, after all of this action, he was still unanimously supported by the Tory party because of course he was. Both Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, at Prime Minister's Questions, acknowledged Mr Wallace's statement in the Commons. He got up and said, basically, I am trans, and read out essentially the same thing he put on his website. Mr Wallace was looking on from the backbenches, while Mr Johnson said, the House stands with you and will give you the support you need to live freely as yourself. Obviously, if he doesn't pay the fine, he won't be living that freely because he'll be in a jail cell, but there you go. This is despite Wallace being formally known for misleading the press about his family's prostitution empire. And we come to the sex pecs part because, of course, we always do. Mr Wallace told BuzzFeed, online inquiries indicate the Sugar Daddy website that his family had built was registered in 2004 and ceased to be operational in 2010. For the avoidance of any doubt, I have never had a financial interest nor been a director of Sugar Daddy Billing Services Limited and cannot comment on its financial or operational activities. A website essentially exploiting women who have been in dire straits financially, who have been ideologically indoctrinated into selling piecemeal their sexuality for female empowerment, or perhaps have had adverse childhood experiences which separate them from the joys of intimacy. He's selling them off to older men who are wealthy and particularly in politics. Actually, one of my friends got approached at the Conservative Party conference by someone that I will not
I thought
name.
you were about to say on the street.
No, she does not belong there.
No, because she got approached at the conference, not just
Yes.
in a seedy place.
Yeah, she wasn't just standing on the corner like it's American Psycho. And he said, I really like your influence in the sphere. Would you like to come on a free holiday to the Canary Islands with me? And I just said,
What, to make videos?
well, sweetheart, there's no such thing as a free holiday. This is obviously not a particularly conservative thing to do, nor is it a very truthful thing to do. And the website's title itself betrays any pretense that this could be setting up long-lasting relationships. It's a purely transactional inquiry, which treats, in a very predatory way, men as the financial fathers of the women that were in their employ, selling intimacy to them bit by bit. It's degrading for both parties in the transaction. It's utterly depraved. It's a symptom of our societal decline in terms of relationships, and I just think you're disgusting if you're doing it, bordering on illegal. But he also misled Parliament about this. Well, not the actual Commons floor, so he can't be held to account over it, but Tonya Antozanati, MP for Gower, Labour, unfortunately, said, Companies House records clearly contradict that statement. The one that Jamie Wallace said, I have no involvement with the financials here. Jamie Wallace is listed at Companies House as a person with significant control of Fields Group Limited. Fields Group Limited is itself listed as the sole shareholder of SD, Sugar Daddy, billing services between October 2007 and October 2010. Within that period, Mr. Wallace was a shareholder and director of Fields Group. So BuzzFeed, which we've got to rely on, unfortunately, for our news here, so take it with a table of salt, reported that 10 companies where Mr. Wallace was or is a director were subject to more than 800 complaints to trading standards between January 2008 and February 2017, according to the local council. No doubt one of those was the Sugar Daddy website. So we're still going to celebrate a convicted criminal, prostitution ring runner, just because he wears a wig. Lovely. So I'm actually in agreement here with Cole's favourite MP, Jess Phillips, who said he needs to be thrown out of the Conservative Party. But he isn't even one of the worst. One of his friends is. Now, this is a very interesting story that I even have a personal connection to, because this gentleman here approached my girlfriend to run an event hiring models, air quotes, as waitresses for businessmen and politicians to make connections. She promptly declined. This is Paul Borrow Longane. The full name, the ballad of Paul Edwin Lancelot Thomas Borrow Longane. People have made a joke out of his name, saying it's borrowed long name because the name is fake. He has created a fake persona to scam prominent Tory girls out of thousands and has tried to hire prostitutes for networking events. His real name is Paul James Langham. He's been knighted by Karl von Habsburg, a member of Austria's defunct nobility, and is one member of the Order of St. George. He's also set up a charity called TSC Commonwealth, which I attended one of the events of at the Carlton Club before this was all very public knowledge. And he's essentially given event planning roles to conservative young women and then encouraged them to take on business loans under their names, which he pays himself from, and then they can pick up the slack when he folds the company and cuts and runs. So he's indebted quite a lot of women. He also has many collapsed businesses. If you look them up on a public business registry, they're just all folded in mysterious circumstances. One of his firms took out a COVID bounce-back loan worth £37,500. The same firm donated £10,000 to Shrewsbury MP Daniel Kaczynski, I'm going to assume that's pronounced. Another of his firms, also ADR, received a state-funded COVID bounce-back loan of £37,500. Oh, the same one, actually. There we go. So if we go on to the article next that explores all of this, the rabbit hole falls deeper. He has hosted events with Jamie Wallace and Health Secretary Sajid Javid while at the time. Let's hope this doesn't come back to haunt Sajid Javid's leadership campaign. It would be terrible if he wasn't Prime Minister, the jab-mad maniac that looks like Uncle Fester. He has a history of collapsed businesses with the concern that he's using loans taken out by his employees to profit from their defaulting. Speaking in the condition of anonymity, one girl, who I actually know, said, he offered me a high-up position in one of his companies. On the grounds of the job, I ended up taking out a business loan, which I didn't know what it was and thought it was essentially a personal loan. Longane ghost wrote her correspondence to the bank, messages seen by Insider, proven. He also assured her that the investment would be safe, including interest. The loan was worth more than £20,000, according to the documents. Half of the sum was put into Paul's business with her. And then Longane took director's expenses out of that, so he paid himself. And he essentially said, oh, if you have it on the books where employees are taking wages, then it's going to encourage investment. It's a sound bet. Just so after the first year of operations, we're going to get more people involved. The woman said that she still has £10,000 of the loan to pay when she became suspicious that he was going to cut and run. And so she's now on the hook for it. So she's got to pay that remaining half back. And knowing her, she's not exactly in a great financial circumstance. And yeah, so he's put her in that position. Separately, another woman is also taking Bora Longane to court. Documents seen by Insider show. Her claim is that he stole £3,000 and used a fake persona to do it, something that was then common knowledge among the sort of party clubs that people would go to, and his name would be whispered as Paul Borrowed Longname because people knew it was made up. He also asked women to organise various events and with some very disreputable staff members. He also attempted to rope Emma Webb from the Free Speech Union into this at one point as well. I spoke to her ex-boyfriend about this, and he knew many reputations of this guy, and essentially this was an open secret that this was going on until it was reported here. No MP took action on it. An update in the next article. Paul is now finally being invested by the Conservative Party after he used the party's Carlton Club and his relationship with MPs to pressure many women and also some other businessmen into dire financial straits. So we shouldn't let Labour off the hook, of course. We've reported many times on this podcast about how many paedophile enablers are in the Labour Party, the grooming gangs that have wrecked this country in various areas and demolished the lives of millions of girls in Britain. But this rot is unfortunately a symptom of the Conservative Party staying in power for far too long without viable opposition, as you said, with Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. The Tory party's sexual impropriety isn't a root of their ideology, unlike Labour. Labour are happy to allow this individual suffering to coexist as long as the cultures that are utterly irreconcilable can be imported en masse to this country and just plopped in various areas. It's the banality of evil. But the Tory party turn a blind eye to it because they hope that, one, their own impropriety won't be leaked out. They can virtue signal loud enough so that the skeletons in their closet don't go rattling, and also that they can cling on to power in lieu of a valid opposition. But I would suggest that if the Tory party want to run to the right, as we suggested in yesterday's segment, that they would not just talk a good game on policy, they wouldn't just implement tax cuts or lower immigration, they would exile these disgusting people from their midst and stay on the watch for this kind of nonsense in future.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the Contemplation series, this one on globalism. And if you want to follow what else Josh is putting out, you can follow him on Getter at Josh_firm on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.